I get the privilege of introducing you to Julianna Ratts. I distinctly remember the first time I met Julianna. It's when she came in for her audition for Rising Balls. And I was taken aback by her confidence that she has. Through these years, I have had the privilege of working alongside her, watching her dedication, her commitment to creativity, to music, to the arts, to drama. She is a wonderful woman of faith, and I love her love for Jesus and her love for others. So it is my honor to introduce you to Julianna Ratts.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl who loved to create stories. She always had a story playing in her head, her ideas constantly running through her mind. Every story she had, she would include a toy, the design to have a specific role and a specific purpose. And sometimes she would even include her brother to add a little comedy or some action to it as well. As years passed, she was no longer being creative with stories, but more with movies. After every time she would watch a movie, she would think about how she could change the story. Whether that would be that the best friend who died would stay alive, or the villain that became good would stay good for the rest of his life. Throughout my life, I have always loved the idea of story and being creative. I just have always loved going to story whenever I am stressed out or bored out of my mind. And stories are the thing that make up who I am. And I believe that everyone is drawn to story. I feel that stories that feel relatable or can be used by what we have learned from stories, read, and relate to our lives so that we can change. God called people to write passages in the Bible to impact others. So my hope is to impact people through the power of story, as well as teach people about the fascination that story brings to me and how story can be shared with others. To start my journey, I decided to think about how story works and what story is, and I learned that the personal relationship with story isn't between the author and the reader, but the author and the word. So, to start our first semester, I decided to interview Jerry Nixon, and he says that when it comes to the message of someone's writing, it's almost like a conversation, in a sense. When you speak to somebody, it is all storytelling. So, what does this mean in writing? Well, stories are not only educational to some, but impactful as well. You need to really think about your audience when you write, or else how can you write? I learned that I never considered my audience when writing. I mean, I like my writing my way and I know my message, but does the audience I'm writing to understand what I'm trying to say? I believe that it is important when it comes to assessing your audience because that is who is going to see your writing, so you need to make your message count. After my interview with Jerry Nixon, I decided to interview the one and only Jerry Jenkins, who wrote the Left Behind series. It was an honor and a privilege to interview this amazing man. And prior to this interview, I decided to read the first book of the Left Behind series, and mind you, it was amazing. I could recommend this whole book to the whole world if I could. Throughout the interview, I couldn't stop fangirling over his book, talking about all of the different interactions between the characters and moments when I simply couldn't put the book down. And one thing he told me was when you have characters that relate to the reader in some way, you can impact someone through that. One example from the book was this character named Chloe, who was left behind after the rapture. She was with her dad, who was also left behind, and after everyone disappeared, he became a Christian. He constantly tried to get Chloe to follow God, but she said, why would she believe in a God who doesn't love her and won't answer her prayers? Hearing those words from her made me think of the times when I said those things about God, or when I've heard others say those things as well. Have you ever watched a good movie or listened to a worship song and you feel yourself relating to the words that the person is saying? Well, that's the same idea. When you use characters or ideas that you feel like people can relate to or have had similar experiences with, you are not only impacting that one person, but more impacting the world. After my interview at Jerry Jenkins, I decided to try some of his online courses. And some of those lessons were talking about the writing world, how to write, inspirational writing, and so much more. But one lesson stood out to me from his courses. It was about setting up a platform, things like social media, blogs, you name it. And one thing he mentioned about making an impact online was that to just remember that your message matters, and people are online right now looking for what you have to offer. I think this shows me that your stories and your experiences that God has given you can simply make an impact on others. There are people in this world who need guidance and the light in their lives, and that is where you come in. You can share your story with others to impact others. I mean, how many of us have seen on Instagram posts where people have tried to tell us to share the story of God with others, or share that video post? The person behind the post wants watchers to share God that way. And through this course, I realized that being a writer is not as easy as it may seem. It takes a lot when it comes to writing, whether that is time, effort, or even motivation. We need to have the effort to grasp the ideas that we have before we can start writing, or else how can we write? We simply can't write a story overnight. It takes the motivation to want to impact someone. This reminds me of Jesus' parables and the impact people felt with them. Because of how the characters related to the issue and situation happening in parables in the passage, people realized the message and knew that it related to themselves and that they related to the story, to the point where most people felt a sense of impact or reflection to themselves. Jesus is communicating to his audience the message by using experiences that can bring a sense of reflection to people, so that when they relate themselves to the story, they have an opportunity to change. But of course, people didn't always change right away, because sometimes it was hard to understand the parable and the meaning behind it until they listened. Jesus wants his people to reflect on the parables and how it relates to people's current state in life. So like Jesus, the author or the writer not only thinks about their story, but thinks more importantly about what they want their audience to hear. The kind of takeaway or impact they want for someone. Without reflection, there is no impact, and without impact, there is no change in someone. The people we are closest to matter, so if you are to have a good message for not just those who you love, but to those whom you may not know, think about the audience's perspective rather than your own, or else the message won't make sense. So now that we've looked more into the depth of story, let's look more into how story starts for people, or in a sense, the active spark. After first semester and into the second semester, I decided to start at the beginning of where writing starts, where I think is creativity. So I decided to dive deeper into the creative atmosphere with the writing world and the creative mind. And by doing this, I learned that people's creativity can come in many different forms. For me, it's story, but for others, it could be something else. As I was thinking about creativity and how to start this journey, I thought of two questions. What is creativity? And how does it relate to the writing world? And on this journey, I started by reading C.S. Lewis's book on stories and other essays on literature. I learned that when an author is writing a story, their ideas come from images in their mind, what I like to call a spark. Whenever I surround myself in different places or different areas, it sparks ideas for me, almost like an inspiration wherever I go. That spark will then motivate me or the author so that they can write, because they simply can't get that idea they thought of out of their head. Have you ever had a dream or a thought in your head that you can't quite forget? Or have you had an idea in your work or in one of your hobbies that you just had to write down? That is what the spark feels like. It is a moment where what you have been impacted by simply sparks a thought that you simply can't forget and want to share with others. So how do authors have the motivation to write? Well, now that we have the spark, they can use that spark to form the idea into a story. But of course, that isn't easy. After reading this book, I decided to interview a children's Christian author named Sherry Carden. She was a super nice lady and such a devoted Christian author that I felt so connected by her. And one quote that stood out to me was that the people around us really, really inspire us as we are close with them. This just shows me that the memories and experiences we share with people can help us to be creative based upon the memories we had. Inspiration comes from anywhere, even for me. Whether I am outside or going on a road trip, there is so much inspiration even within our lives. Well, now we have inspiration aspect of creativity. What does creativity look like in people? Well, I did a little experiment based on a post on Facebook that Jerry Jenkins did, where he had people write the story based on one random image. And so I decided to do the same thing to the elementary kids here at FOCS. And here's what I did. I had kids look at 3 different images, just random images, and told them to write a story based on the one they picked. After writing their story, the teachers would hand me the hard copy, and then I would read them. And here's what I noticed from that. That even though some kids didn't want to write, some or maybe most wanted to write more or even finish the story. It just shows that the amount of imagination the child had shows that they fell in love with the story to the point they had to finish it. It just shows their love for their imagination. And some people even went beyond the picture. They were almost stepping into the picture and seeing more into it, diving deeper into their own imagination. And my favorite moment was when this one little girl was writing her story, and it was recess time. And instead of going to recess, she finished her story. And it just showed me that when we create something in any way, shape, or form, there is this longing to create even more. For stories, we want to keep the story going rather than stopping their imagination and letting the imagination run wild. And seeing these kids' creativity makes me want to be more creative and express my creativity more. So as God is a creative person, we all should be. This means that using creativity in our everyday lives matters. We can use the gifts that God has given us to be creative and add color into this black and white world. So, how are we supposed to use writing and creativity in our everyday life? Well, now that we've discussed how the power story works and how story starts, as well as the creative aspect of this story, I decided to dive deeper into the creative mind and how it works. According to Julianna Ratts, she says that creativity can be broadly defined as the ability to produce something both novel and valuable. It is not limited to artists, writers, or musicians. It's apparent in the way we solve unexpected problems, come up with novel solutions, or even craft great work. And this just shows that creativity comes in many different forms. It doesn't have to be writing like I do. It can be whatever makes you feel good or gets ideas flowing. A neuroscientist named Roger Beatty says there are two things that come with creativity: idea generation and idea evaluation. Idea generation comes from the default network, and it's when we allow our minds to wander, not focusing on anything in particular. But when it is active, we are daydreaming, spontaneous thoughts carry our minds away, and those thoughts can be memories of the past, alternate variations of the present, and visions of potential futures. However, idea evaluation is when the infinite regions of the brain that are associated with cognitive control are active to the point where it works on fully oriented tasks that involve more attention and vision. He also says that when we allow our minds to wander, we are not exerting a great degree of control over our train of thought. But when we focus on a specific task, we're doing the opposite, maintaining focus, directing our attention, and redirecting it when we get distracted, intentionally not allowing our mind to wander. And this shows me that when we are in a state of peace and our mind is wandering, we are using creativity without us even knowing it. I mean, for example, the teachers who are at Front Range teaching and preparing lessons is creativity, as well as the students here preparing papers and doing papers is also creativity as well. And this just shows that a lot of what we do is creativity without us even knowing it. A study that was funded by the National Science Foundation was used to examine musicians' brain hemispheres activity during improvisations of music. What it showed was that creativity was driven by the right hemisphere for inexperienced improvisations. However, experienced people were driven by the left hemisphere. And it just shows that creativity is a right brain ability when a person deals with unfamiliar situations. But creativity draws on the left hemisphere when a person is experiencing a task. And as you can see on this diagram of the brain, the right side is more just imagination, the creative aspect, but the left side is just memory and the past that we rely on when we have to do creative problem solving. It just shows that how much we rely on our brains when it comes to the unfamiliar, as well as using both sides of our brain to work together. When it comes to writing and knowing if the ideas we have are the ones you want to express to others, I think about this quote by Sherry Carmen that says, when God puts something on your heart that we are to do, He will empower you to it, and that the feeling in your heart will not go away while you're working on it, even if it gets really hard. It just shows that when we get into that creative mindset and we have ideas that we can't seem to get rid of, we need to do something about it. This happened on my senior solo. I was bored out of my mind in the middle of the woods, allowing my mind to wander. And all of a sudden, God told me to write a story. And so I did. God was giving me all these amazing ideas, and I fell in love with these ideas so much, and they were so meaningful that I had to use all of them. After writing my story, I felt moved by it, and God spoke to me and told me who I am. He says that I am a creative light to those in the darkness, and that I am to write stories for those living in darkness. And after my solo, I decided to share this story with other people, my teachers and my peers, and all of them said I should get this published. I realized from that moment to now that being creative with stories is now not only my passion, but my calling from God. I like to think the story as God's book. How God is the author and the world is God's book. And the people in the Bible are his characters. And he wants us, as his characters, to share our story with others. So my hope for all of you is to use your story and experiences that God has given you to impact someone else. God has already written our story, but he wants our story to share with others. So, remember that little girl I mentioned earlier? That was me. I from early in my life, it was apparent through God that I was meant to be involved with stories. And how I plan to do that in the future is I plan to use my creative writing skills for film and writing as a media psychology. And I want and long to make a difference for the world with my creativity as well. So my encouragement for all of you is that you would use a little creativity each and every day. You don't have to be like me and become a writer to make a difference. You simply just need to be the creative person that God has created you to be. Whether that be drawing, speaking, or singing, whatever it is, be a creative light to those in the darkness. And I want to end with this quote by Sherry, which says, "Carry on for the King and find out day by day what he wants for you. How to use those tools he's given you, and he will bring people alongside you to help you do that. And just go one day at a time with him." Thank you.
So we have a little bit of time if anyone has any questions for Julianna.
What's your story about?
So it was about a little girl in the middle of the woods, and she meets this wolf. And it's scary. Yeah, a wolf.
Okay.
I don't know how I got that. Okay, it's really. Oh yeah, here we go. And so it was a wolf. And this wolf was, it reminded me of Aslan, and this girl was like saying, "Well, who are you?" And this wolf goes, "Well, I am Yahweh, and I have come to ask you one question." And this girl goes, "All right, what is it?" And he goes, "Who are you?" And the girl goes, she thinks for a minute, she goes, "I got it. I'm a child of the Most High God." And the wolf goes, "Yes, you are, but who are you?" And she goes, "Well, I thought that was the answer." And he goes, "That's the answer, who you are, who are you?" So she thinks again, and she goes, "All right, I am a creative writer to all." And he goes, "Yes, you are, but who are you?" So then this goes on forever and ever and ever. And then all of a sudden, she goes, "I give up. Who am I?" And Yahweh tells her who she is, and that's kind of how God told me who I was. And then he tells her to turn around. He like points behind her. And she turns around. I remember the same thing. I turned around, and I turned back, and the girl turns back, and God's in front of her. But she doesn't know that because it's a hooded white figure. And she goes, and she's like blinded by him. And so she goes, "Well, who are you?" And he goes, "I'm the one that you've been waiting for." And she goes, "Oh my gosh, you are the one I've been waiting for." And he takes out his pen and goes, "Come with me, let's write our stories together." And they walk into the distance, and then I was just like, "You are." And I was like, "Yes!" It was, yeah, that's the kind of story, the basis of the story. And I'm hopefully thinking that later in the future, I'm hopefully thinking of it actually.
Right. Wow.
Any other questions?
Rosita. As you write, Anita, do you feel like the more you write, the more your characters take a life of their own? Suddenly, you are just the pen, and they are the ones that.
So, this is the weird thing. Every time I write a story, it's a movie in my head, and I imagine myself in that place. And even when I'm dreaming, too, when I'm asleep, I can't tell you how crazy it is to realize I'm in those dreams and I am like actually them. And so, to answer your question, yes. I mean, every time I figure out a character and their personality, I mean, I even wrote a screenplay, and as I was writing the screenplay, each character I had, I knew exactly what their backstory was, I knew exactly what they were, and I just know from the start, like, this is what I want them to be. And it just makes me feel like, it's just so cool. So. Yes.
I read a quote that is, "I don't make characters, I take myself apart and I give those pieces names."
Yes.
That was just totally
No, that's awesome.
But, what kind of genre?
Fantasy. Everyone's fantasy. Maybe action. Someone like action back, but mostly fantasy.
right, we unfortunately are out of time. I know for myself, I'm looking forward to great things from you, Julianna. It's amazing. So I'm sure she's happy to answer more questions if you want to stay around, but I need to dismiss you. We do have a break at this point in time. So thank you all for being here.